Good morning. I appreciate being invited to speak with you this morning. I did want to say that while I was interviewing for the job I currently have, it became obvious to me that the mining community really is a family. And I was so excited going around my neighborhoods, and I met somebody from the mining community. And even though I'm a lifelong Alaskan, it was the first person that I had met that worked in the mining industry. And then soon after that, I started attending the Alaska Miners Association breakfast in Anchorage, along with Senator Giesel, who is also very interested in other members of the legislature. And again, it became obvious to me that the mining community really is a family. You're friends, you work together, you face sometimes seemingly daunting issues, mostly from the federal government and other areas. And so you're fighters, and you're survivors, and most importantly, you're producers. So I did, with that, I wanted to then thank you for welcoming me into your family, and also I wanted to take a moment to share my family with you. So if you'll excuse me for a moment, I am married to Andrew Billings, and excuse me, he is a lifelong Alaskan. He was born and raised in Fairbanks. He currently is a pilot for Everett's Air Cargo, and he flies a DC-6 all around the state, delivering cargo and landing at all of those fun and interesting airports. And if there's somebody whose job I'm jealous of, it's my husband's. I'd love to be doing that myself. So. And we have two sons, Andrew John, who's 7, and school starts at 9 o'clock in the morning. I can tell you right now, Andrew John's at the kitchen table. He is creating something out of Legos. If any of you are familiar with Legos, they come out with these really impressive, kits. And in his particular kit, he's building an erector set, and it has sensing devices, so he can program it to change direction after it, senses that something's a certain distance away from the unit. So, so anyway, very proud of my kids. And Andrew John's also a reader. He's read the 5 books in the Harry Potter series, which is impressive because he's in first grade. Welcome, Representative Wilson. He also has a collection of chess trophies, and a particularly impressive win against Jim Clark. So, and we also have a 5-year-old son, Roman, who is actually named in his name. He'll say Matthew. The other time he'll say Roman, and he's interested in gymnastics, and is just a spitfire of a son, and I feel really honored, to be their mom. And as I sit in the legislative halls and I sit in meetings, I'm always thinking about the future of young people in Alaska, and where will they be? What will they be doing when we start looking at some of these dates that are pretty near in our future? For example, one of the things that we hear often in the House Finance Committee as the departments are presenting is that at the rate of growth of 7.8% in government spending, which is the historic rate of growth, the governor's budget increase is not nearly that large, but historically we will be operating in the red in 2015 in Alaska. By 2025, we will have depleted our cash reserves. And so these things are troubling. It's very troubling to hear this, and each of the departments are coming before the Finance Committee recently, presenting their budgets. They all have a similar story, which is loss of federal funds, higher demand on some of the services that they provide. And so, these are troubling things to hear. At the same time, the high price of oil is masking the decline in production, and so we're also looking at a $3.7 billion surplus. So there are these mixed messages out there in terms of the budget, but for me it's that excuse me, 2025 date. I'm not comfortable with the idea that we're going to be operating our state government and with our savings depleted. And so one of the things, though, that gives me hope, and I'm very proud and happy to have been given two departments, the Department of Natural Resources and Commerce Community Economic Development, whose budgets I oversee in the process. And when the Department of Natural Resources came before the Finance Committee and presented recently, it was obvious that here's a department where what we're doing and what the state's trying to do is creating wealth, producing our wealth. And really, when you look at where can Alaska look to for the future, I don't believe we can save ourselves into prosperity or spend ourselves into prosperity. I think we have to produce. And so really it's your community and what you've provided to the state that is really the future of Alaska. And when we look at, we have a handful of mines in the state, but we also know that Alaska ranks in the top 10 in the world in terms of coal, copper, lead, gold. And so we have to ask ourselves, with those kinds of statistics, we should be doing more. And one of the things that we've looked at last year very seriously, and we'll continue to look at this year, is how can we do the job that the state needs to do in an efficient manner and not present you with a backlog. When the mining community comes to the state and needs permits and needs that process to go smoothly and needs it to be transparent and needs it to be predictable and needs it to be efficient, are we measuring up to that? And the answer is no. But the good news is that the Commissioner of Natural Resources and the staff at the Department of Natural Resources understands that. They came to the legislature last year with a request for increase in positions for permitting, and we actually increased it and provided almost a $10 million increase in their budget, but with some strings attached. And we really did hold their feet to the fire and say, with this additional positions, we want to know that that permitting backlog will be improved and that the process will be improved. And so what we're really eager to hear in the budget subcommittee process this year is that there is good news. I know Ed Fogels was here last week and reported that there's a 21% reduction in the permitting backlog, and so that's good news. We also see in their budget request some funding for a unified permitting process, and so we're hoping that this problem will continue to get better. I can say that as a state legislator representing Anchorage, I do get on a weekly basis people coming to my office with stories about the permitting process and the hurdles that they're seeing. And I always tell them that the good news is that the department and the commissioner there will lend a sympathetic ear. From their point of view, they're trying to fix the airplane as it's flying, so they're trying to address some of these chronic issues, but at the same time improve the process for everybody. And I think that that's really important as we move forward and try to develop more of our resources. Yesterday we heard in finance from the Alaska Mental Health Trust Authority. They have an aggressive portfolio for developing resources, and so it's in everybody's benefit for the process to work as efficiently as possible. So we look forward to that. We also have a few things in their budget that we're looking at. The RS-2477 issue is important, and last week I met with the Department of Law and some representatives from the Fairbanks area. Last year we funded them at about $600,000 to sort of chip away at this backlog of RS-2477 issues, and what we're seeing is that many of the Alaskans whose testimony is really critical to establishing these routes as historic are older, and they're an aging population. And so what we talked about is going out and communicating to the public that we need information from people about these routes, because there's several options that the state can go through to actually address some of them. And that was troubling to me too, because the feds have this system which is a temporary solution, which to me means that then at some point the state has to go back and readdress these issues, and the information will be the same. So my feeling is, why don't we just resolve it? I mean, this is an issue that has been around since when I first started working for state government, which was in the Hickel administration. So I know some of you are really interested in that issue, and so we'll be looking at the department's request in their budget for that. Let's see, they also have a $4 million request that's actually in the Department of Administration for their Alaska Geologic Materials Center replacement facility. I don't know how many of you have seen the facility in Eagle River. Anyone seen it? Well, apparently I haven't seen it, but the way it's described to me is, here's a place that houses really the hands-on history of Alaska. I mean, you've got all of the core samples from the North Slope and other areas, and companies are coming to Alaska and visiting this building, which is really just a shack, and they're making decisions on future investment in Alaska in this rundown shack. And also there's an important message here. If we can bring this facility up to the standard that it should be, it also is an important educational opportunity. I know you guys are thinking about the next generation and the high school kids, but there's a history to be told here by looking at these core samples, and a very rich history. And so there's also an opportunity there for the state to help educate the public in general about the importance of our resources. So anyway, with that, I wanted to go ahead and open it up for questions. And again, I appreciate you having me here today. Yeah. John.
I really want to express appreciation for, especially an Anchorage legislator, being so concerned about resource development, and especially about Southeast. Question I have with respect to RS 2477, it's my understanding that the Bureau of Land Management position and policy is that each and every separate RS 2477 route has to be adjudicated in a process on a one-by-one basis, as opposed to a blanket recognition that these RS 2477 routes, are historic and they're and is there some way in which the Alaska legislature and this administration can make the point that in Alaska these RS 2477 routes are, in various places, and that they ought to be addressed collectively as a right that's there, and then identified and made available for the public and for potential investors.
John, it's my understanding that they do have to be looked at individually, case by case. If there's anyone else here who has more information on that, I'd be happy to hear it. But that's my understanding, that each route has a specific history that's unique to it, and so we are having to go through them one by one.
Continuing on along with John's thought on here, and this is just for, I guess, my information. On 2477, so many of these are old, like John says, old trails. And going back through the years and whatnot, the Yukon Territory and basically Alaska were very, very closely entwined. We still are, geologically. But the point I'm asking is, do our trails, which started in Alaska, wandered through Canada, came back into Alaska, does that allow us to have input to the Canadian side as well as the Canadian side to us? And obviously, if that's the truth, is there any communication going on with the federal government, Ottawa, and state of Alaska? It's an area that I don't know it's really well defined, but I know that they're there, and I'm thinking that it's something that we're missing in pursuing this, and I think that gets into the First Nations. There's a whole one. And if we don't make some sort of a serious effort on this, then I think it's going to be very, very tough.
I do think it's a priority for the department and the administration, and I will ask that question as I continue following this issue, and there'll be follow-up opportunities for me to do that. So I will ask on that issue. Yes.
Yeah, following us on the routes and the roads, Congressman Young, when he was the chairman of Department of Transportation, in the Department of Transportation bill that he was able to father and muster through, included a lot of road and utility corridors for Southeast Alaska. I noticed in the IRP it doesn't even mention this hard fought, and the environmentalists have fought this tooth and nail to even get these rights away. We right now have rights away for roads and utilities. Some of these routes, there's a road and a utility corridor all the way to Canada through the Taku River. There's another one through the Bradfield. The problem with this legislation is that they have a use or lose provision of 50 years. And I mean, this is basically, people are forgetting about that we have already maybe have some rights. And they also trump this land management plan, because the way it's written, they have to respect these road corridors. And I would just like to see our, with this routes in the RS 2477s, that these also, maybe we give some recognition to some of the work that some Alaskans have done, like Don Young, to get these rights away, and let's preserve these, or let's make some effort so that we don't run into this use or lose. They're 50-year rights away, and it says if they're given to the state of Alaska, and they're recorded in the recorder's office, and if we don't make progress on them, then they go fallow, they go back to the federal government. And I think it's really important that we just, at a minimum, preserve our rights on those issues.
Absolutely, and I think as the integrated resource plan goes through the public hearing process, that's an important issue to bring up, and I can certainly look into that too and comment. So, yes.
I know it's not real high on the priority list now, but a lot of residents in Juneau are starting to get access literature from DOT. Being up in the Anchorage area in the bowl, it's important. Things don't, fight as we may about natural resources, if it doesn't go the way we hope it's going to go in the next decade or two, a road down here is going to be just so much more important to get our contribution into the state coffers. When you talk to your constituents in Anchorage, is this something that's even on their radar? And I mentioned to you there's a lot of other legislators around here. It's not just a Juneau issue. It is for the whole state. Is this something that's even being, is it on the radar screen with people you're talking to?
Well, I have to be honest with you. I have not had anybody bring that up to me, but I can tell you that my first job out of college was here in Juneau, and the Juneau Access Project was something that I was reporting on. And so to come back in this position and still see no progress, really, and it's really frustrating.
Thank you.
Jim.
Where are we going to go on coastal zone in the legislature?
Oh, I thought you were going to ask about a rematch.
I already have, but your son has got to come down here so we can take it on.
Don't you have a computer? They have online.
I'm not that smart.
Okay. Well, I think the lesson there is to never underestimate your opponent.
Absolutely. Incidentally, just my comment, he is amazingly good at chess. I mean, amazingly good. I've played the adults who don't measure up to her 7-year-old son. He is really, really good.
Okay, so back to your real question.
So now that I've done what you wanted me to do.
Yeah, right. As you know, the legislature passed an initiative bill that has certain requirements now for the role of the legislature in an initiative process, and so it's my understanding that the House Judiciary Committee and the Senate Judiciary Committee will be hosting a hearing, and the law states that the purpose of such a hearing is to hear from the state how the initiative will affect the operation of state government. So I do believe that Commissioner Susan Bell will be testifying, because the initiative places the program in a new department, in her department, and probably DNR and perhaps the Department of Law. But I do know the legislature will be having a hearing on that. other than that, we're looking at, following the issue and seeing if all the signatures are valid and if it passes all the hurdles, that are in the process. So, although the bill is significantly different than what was passed out of the House last session, and as you know, subsequent opportunities to vote on it didn't pass because it had changed significantly from the original version. So that's the story there with that. Paul?
Yeah, I'd like to lobby for one thing for the AMA. For years, and every year, we try to get in the budget money for aeronautical surveys. I don't know if it's there. I haven't looked at the budget or what the governor's done. But that's one significant budget item that investors really have improved their look at Alaska and where they need to go for claims and other things. So I'd like to throw that out when you're looking at the budget. There's some years it's been taken out, and we go in and fight it for it coming back because legislators don't understand how important that is to the state of Alaska and the mining industry.
I do know that there are people working on putting a mapping, money in the capital budget for the statewide mapping. So I do know it's being talked about. So.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to add, though, in the end, because I see no more questions on her, she is really significant for Alaska as an individual. And I'd like to talk about it because we were taking some people around yesterday and talking about getting a community pool in one of our rural communities that is really needed. And I told them, I said, well, here's somebody that understands pool. She is an Alaskan Olympian in swimming. She represents the state really, really well, and I'm kind of honored to say that. That you didn't know that. She's family-oriented. Well, her family would speak well of her, too, about what she's achieved, not just being elected, but being an Olympian is quite an honor.
Well, thank you, Paul. And I want to correct the record. I went to trials. My husband and I were the first two Alaskans to go, and our kids are now swimmers. And so, but I have to say that it was an interesting meeting because sometimes the days get long, and you're bombarded with all this information. And as I was, someone was sharing with me all the benefits of swimming, I was thinking to myself, obviously, but I did find out that the pool is being proposed as a 4-lane, and like you saw my reaction, you really need a 6-lane pool. So you can have official meets. So anyway, yes?
Just want to quickly point out that the AMA legislative reception is this coming Tuesday. You're invited, your husband's invited. There's room for a DC-6 out there. Please come.
All right, thank you. Yes?
Okay, I might be in the wrong area. I hope I'm in the right church. Anyway, getting back to the things I'm speaking of, things that happened in the past, and John can back me up on this. In the First World War, there was timber taken out of southeastern Alaska, and it was taken for airplanes. It was a high-grade spruce and whatnot of that nature. Now, many of these are still on paper and whatnot of that. And to me, I don't think that's ever been defined. John probably is a lot more familiar on this. I don't think this has ever really been defined into a 2477. But what I am saying is that on Prince of Wales Island, in my own time, I built 400 miles of road on it. That road is just being tore up, destroyed. Now those are all, it's the age-old story. Give me a boat trail, and I can make a highway. The point that I'm trying to make is that much of this work is already out there done, and it's not being utilized in any way, size, or shape, or form. It's just ready to go back to nature. Nature's lovely, but it takes 100 years for anything like that to happen. We'll never ever have the opportunity or the access that we have now, and if we're losing it, I don't know where we go, but I think, and it's not just us. Bognack's got the same problem. And Alaska's got the same problem. It's an area I don't think that really has been thought or brought or looked at. So put it in your boat.
Okay. I do know the state of Utah, because of a particular situation that occurred, they are filing all theirs at the same time and sort of overwhelming the federal government. And I know our state we've traveled there and met with the state officials there to talk about an overarching strategy and which strategy is most successful. Certainly there's a reason to get these done faster because of the reasons you stated, and also pretty soon, those oral histories of the people who know about these trails, if they're not around to talk about them, then essentially the case that Alaska can make has been erased. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.